Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way is in Training. This is a podcast exploring how warriors should train and fight, as well as how they should live. We will talk about technique, but we'll also dive deep into fitness, mindset, and strategy. We will explore leadership and philosophy as well. So whether you are a young soldier, a veteran police officer, a responsible armed citizen, or simply someone looking for an authentic life, let's examine how the lessons of combat and preparation for it can help us fulfill our potential. Let's explore the way together and learn how the discipline of training can show us our true selves amidst the chaos of life. Hey everybody, today I've got my good friend Tim Herron with me. If you're not a competitive shooter and don't know who he is, Tim is both a phenomenal shooter, very, very high ranked nationally as a competitive shooter, and an excellent instructor. Definitely one of the top 5 classes I've taken, if not the top class I've ever taken. So if you care about your shooting, whether you're a competitor or not, you should definitely seek him out and take a class. You will not regret it. All right, Tim, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and then we'll start the conversation.
I'm Tim Herron. So I own and operate Tim Herron Shooting LLC, which is my full-time business now. I've been shooting since about 2010, when I kind of picked up the sport and began pistol shooting. Kind of was a perpetual B class guy, for a couple of years, when I first kind of started out in the sport and sought out training with other peers, kind of within our group. One of those guys being Mike Seeklander, who I kind of hold near and dear to me as far as kind of holding responsible for my, kind of my comeuppance. About 2013, 2014 is when I kind of got over the hump because I kind of figured out my training and was able to make Grandmaster in one division, and one division turned into 2, turned into 4 now. So I compete in both USPSA primarily, and I dabble a little bit in IDPA as well. But I've been teaching full time now. I was able to kind of quit my full time job after 26 years as an automotive guy to pursue teaching full time in about 2019. So this is kind of going on the end of year number 5 for me, which has been phenomenal.
So what changes did you make to get you over that B class hump?
That's a great question. The big one for me was the fact that I wasn't training with a purpose, right? Yeah. So, and I think many people go through that where they feel like, well, they buy the dry fire books and they buy the live fire books and they follow the programs at whatever set out there. Do 20 reps of this and then do 15 reps of that and do 50 reps of this. And I think doing reps, if it's something to get you off the couch and at least get you touching the gun, if shooting training is your thing, that's great, but it's only going to get you so far, right? So there needs to be a little bit of an intensity about it and a purpose to what you're doing, and more than anything, a focus. So the issues that I had prior to kind of getting over the B class hump for me was that I would do all the things I think I'm supposed to do, right? And follow all of these plans in the books and stuff like that. But I wasn't doing it honestly, for one, and I was kind of without a purpose. Going through the reps is one thing, but truly understanding and evaluating every single repetition of something you're doing, and like being able to answer the why for yourself is what was missing. Right. So Mike Seeklander for me was the guy that was like, man, I'll bet you do a lot of draws in your dry fire. I was like, oh yeah. He goes, and I'll bet you do a lot of reloads. And I was like, oh yeah. And he goes, and I'll bet you even work on some transition stuff back and forth and things like that. I go, oh yeah. And he goes, and I'll bet you do it all at the same time together. Right. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, you're doing it wrong. And I was like, oh God, it was just a strike to the heart, And he said, what you need to be doing is you truly need to regiment your practice and your training to be able to purposely focus all of your attention on one aspect of your shooting. He goes, like similar to like a workout routine. Like if you went to the gym and you worked out. And I was like, oh, oh yeah. And he goes, forget just doing a number of reps and sets. He goes, and think about it as, what is today's goal? What am I truly focused on today? And instead of trying to rep out these hour-long and hour-and-a-half long dry fire sessions, like keep them short but very poignant, and keep it very purposeful to exactly what it is you're trying to get out of that one session. And he's like, so if you're working draws, work 2 or 3 different aspects of the draws, like whether it be surrender draws and hands at sides draws or something like that. But spend 15 to 20 minutes just on that and really focus your attention on, how does the hands interact with the pistol? How does my support hand grip on the gun? Are the pressures correct the way they need to be? It's not just throw the rep out there, and if the sights or the dot are there, great. If they're not, oh well, put the gun back in the holster and do another rep. Like truly evaluating why you're here, what you're here for, and what it is you're trying to get out of the session that was the night and day difference for me.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, man, because, and you know this, we've known each other a few years now. Like I came into USPSA after a long career, in special forces and being a SWAT guy. And my training had been informed by what I knew of, competition shooting training.
Right.
So I was lucky enough to come in A class and make M in like 3 months. And I was stuck. You remember this? I was stuck. Yeah. I couldn't get any further. Everything that got me to that place was now a limiting factor, and I couldn't go past it.
Right.
Dude, that was so painful. It was several painful years of trying to figure out how to actually train shooting in a way that made sense. Right. And I did like this deep dive everywhere I could think of. I looked at how people program athletes training, sports psychology, all this stuff, trying to figure out, okay, what am I doing wrong about my training? So it wasn't the effort I was putting in. I was putting in a huge amount of effort, but the effort wasn't purposeful and deliberate enough. I wasn't attentive enough to what I needed to be attentive to.
I preach that to students as well. I was like, we equate like the desire to push, try, hurry, as like our friend Steve Anderson would say, or, just like, okay, I have to go fast. Like we equate that to, okay, more effort is needed. And we dump an extreme amount of effort at things instead of an extreme amount of focus or purpose.
Yes.
And there is a huge difference between the two.
Deliberate practice.
Yes.
Purposeful, intentional, deliberate practice, I think is really, and you were one of the people that helped me figure that out. So for everybody listening, there was a few, but you were definitely one of them. I think we were doing, it was either Blake drills. It was like basically 2 Blake drills with movement between classes. And you came up and you're like, why are you shooting this at 2.5 seconds? I'm like, I'm trying to go faster. And you're like, stop trying to go faster. Just go faster. See it sooner. I'm like, okay. And I did my first Blake drill ever under 2 seconds in that class.
Yes.
So, something else you do, and this is kind of on the same topic that I really dig and I've adopted since I had the class with you and AJ, is not just charting PRs, but charting consistency.
Yes. Like I use averages all the time for everything that I do.
And I think that's so huge because really people maybe conflate's a better term. People conflate what they can do at their best when they're hooking up at 110%, what their actual skill level is. That's not your actual skill level.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I think there's a time and a place for that, right? Because that drags you higher.
Absolutely.
But don't get it, people get it twisted. They're like, well, that's how good I am. No, dude, that's not how good you are. None of us are as good as we are on Instagram.
Yep. 100%. 100%. So, I mean, it's just, that has been for me over the last, I'd say 3 to 4 years, that has been my biggest like paradigm shift, not only in my own practice and training, but also then how I kind of relate that information and that concept to students. Yep. We believe that like a plateau, for instance, we always conflate things like it's a plateau. I can't seem to get over X hump. right? I want a 2 second build drill, or, oh, I would love to get a sub 1 second draw, or, like you mentioned, a Blake drill in sub 2 seconds or something. And they feel like because they're not constantly moving the needle, to the direction that they want, or seeing the metric itself, like come down, that they're not making progression. And nothing could be further from the truth. If you're truly putting in the work, where you're actually like realizing true progression are in the places where you feel like you are plateaued. Yeah. And so we go through the motions all the time and feel like I can't get past this next metric, but don't fret. Like the boring, monotonous work is where we're really building the myelination, or those neural pathways of saying like, hey, the consistency is key. And generally what's been missing every single time that we're bumping the number in the direction that we want to, and we think that is progression, or like an increase in performance. It's really not. It's when we start realizing how consistent our practice is, and we may not be making the progress that we think we are, but I promise you what you're doing there is you're driving that progress into a means of you being able to execute more on demand and more consistently. And that's what's missing for a lot of folks, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been something I've struggled with, partly because of my personality type, right? I try to bend the universe to my will. The universe doesn't care what I want. Right? Exactly right. Things are what they are. And like that point from your class was one of the biggest takeaways I've ever gotten, because, and I think I've heard it kind of phrased in a different way before, but I didn't realize it's what they were talking about. Someone we both know in this class said, score your drills in aggregate, right? Yeah. And I think that's what he meant.
I was getting ready to bring that up as well. Yeah. So, he's been a big fan of that for years.
Yeah, but it's really like, because that's where I've struggled, especially at major matches, because it's such a long event with so many stages. I have these ups and downs because I tend to push a little too much because of my personality type, which is another thing I'm working on. But just taking that to my training in this last year. And yes, I like the PRs and I do push for the PRs, of course. Yeah. But the real improvement is in how close can I get consistently to that PR?
Yes.
How tight narrow that gap? How close to make my consistent performance to my best performance?
Right. And I'm working things like on a hit factor, right? Where we're balancing speed and accuracy together. I'll set the drill up and I'll work the drill, and then, like to establish what my baseline metric is on that. And then from there, I take the hit factor away from it for a little bit. And I start to focus on how much more do I have in the tank, like speed wise, right? Like how expeditiously can I do this? And so, maybe I let go of accuracy for a moment to just understand like what the physical capabilities are, or like where my physical limits are. And then I'll do that for 4 or 5 reps, and I'll kind of build an average based on that. Okay. So I can do that in, if I was working on it in say 3.5 seconds, can I do it in 3 seconds flat? Or can I do it in 2.8? Like what is the PR time without holding myself back to just the accuracy standard at first? And then I want to start putting, the accountability back into it. So then it becomes like, all right, so now that I've realized the speed potential, let me go ahead and kind of sprinkle the accuracy back into it. And I start working on the consistency. The consistency then might be, okay, maybe my max speed on that might have been 2.7 seconds. But when I put the accuracy back into it, I'm truly paying attention to what's going on, like precision wise, it may turn into a 2.9 or a 3 second drill, but all A's or 95 to 98% alpha. Now I've realized, like a true gain or increase. And of course, then that increase then turns into, all right, I have 4 runs back to back to back to back to just put it together consistently. Can I do this again? Okay, there was the hit factor. Let's say the hit factor was at 10.2. And then the next run, okay, there's a 10.3. But the next one after that is a 10.0. And am I within, let's say, 95 to 98% of the hit factor, or within 0.2 of a hit factor of whatever that new goal was realized. Can I make it consistent? Then I'll take a break and I'll break off to something else for a while. And then I may revisit that drill just a couple more times in the same session, but 20 to 30 or 45 minutes later, after I've gotten my mind and my attention off of it, to bring it back to the fold again and say, okay, I've got 2 reps or 3 reps back to back to back. Can I go back and copy, right, or maintain the exact same thing I was just doing an hour ago or so?
And I think I had a couple thoughts on that. Like, one is, like, I think that interleaving style of practice is really not done enough by people. And I'm guilty of it too, because it's so much, we want to just kind of do things in a step-by-step fashion, like a block fashion. And it's just not as effective as, like what I'll do a lot is, like, I divide drills into combination, isolation, experimentation, and validation, right? And in a typical practice session, I don't really have much experimentation or validation. Like, the validation's the test, that's like a map, or if I'm testing myself on something. So typically it's that isolation and combination stuff. And what I like to do is a lot is I'll set up like the combination drill, I'll do like a mini stage or like, Les's Calvin ball or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll do 3 to 5 reps on it. And then I'll go do an isolation drill, go do a bill drill, go do a Blake drill, go do 4 aces, go do something I'm working on, and grind at that for a minute until I feel like I haven't gotten any more out of it. Then I'll go back to the combination work and do that again.
Right.
3 to 5 reps. And I found that is a really productive way to practice for me. Like, it really seems to help me practice. And the cool thing is too, like, lately in my dry fire, like, I know you're a big advocate of ACE too, right? What it allows me to do is allows me to train that way in dry fire, because I see hits and I see the hits and I see the hit factor and the time. And yes, it's still dry fire. There's no recoil, but it allows me to do that kind of thinking process in my dry fire training, which is, I don't know if you could really do it without that feedback.
I know, I 100% agree. Part of the isolation stuff for me is, instead of working just a particular, like, I like what you do there, as far as like, okay, I'm going to run a mini stage or something a little more complex, right? A 12 round to 18 round kind of complex drill or exercise to kind of validate what you've been working on in dry fire throughout the week at that one time that you're going to the range. And I do the same thing. But then what I will do, instead of like, okay, I'm going to work on bill drills for a moment or isolate one particular skill set, what I do is I run the isolation metric based on what am I seeing, or where am I seeing the wheels fall off a little bit in this complex exercise, right?
Like that.
So that kind of turns into like, damn, I keep overrunning that 25-yard, that 25-yard transition, and I'm not giving myself enough time to just settle the sights a little bit more. And I keep shooting Charlies, or I've shot 2 or 3 delta on that. So instead of doing the entire complex skill set, then it just becomes, I'm going to work off, let's say, this 3-yard target right to that 25-yard target and start building like a pattern development, and like understanding the pattern. Like, I have to have my eyes directly to this spot to drive the gun right here. And I really need to focus on how the trigger feels as I'm prepping through the wall and then pressing to make sure I'm releasing that shot to the A zone. And then like I disregard time, I disregard speed, I disregard anything else other than what does it look like to do it properly. And I'll do that for 4 or 5 reps, and sometimes 4 or 5 minutes. So instead of spending 18 rounds and 10 more reps, and there's 180 to 200 rounds out of your practice session, I'm going to spend 5 or 6 minutes just replicating what is it like to get that gun from that target to that target and break a shot, and then back to that target again and break that shot. And then from that target, break 2 shots and then move the gun on. And I'll kind of build back up. And then once I'm like, okay, I've got that part figured out, now let's go back to the entire exercise and mold everything, back together.
I really like that. Matter of fact, I'm going to move that into my dry fire virtual system too, and do it there too, because you can do it there too. You just have the beep go off and do just that part of it.
Yep. Yeah. And just isolating the transition to the entry, or more, if I feel like, God dang it, I am watching for holes down on that target. Like, what the hell am I waiting for? I should be moving that gun and my eyes off that target the moment I break that shot. Why haven't I done that yet? And then isolate the exit on the transition, right? So it's just firing the shot like we would teach shot calling. So just bang and move that gun over. Bang. I'm like, okay, now I've got that figured back out again. Let's put it back in. Let's put it back in the mix of something.
I'm so stealing that.
Hell
yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot.
So the great thing is it keeps me task oriented and still focused without. Sometimes we do the interleaving thing, but it gets us into the weeds on other things. You're like, all right, I'm going to spend 50 to 100 rounds of my practice session doing this complex drill or exercise. And then we're like, okay, now I'm going to get over here and I'm going to do, let's say, some bill drills or a Blake drill, or I don't know, just insert whatever you want to for 5 or 6 rounds. And then it almost turned, like sometimes we get into the weeds on, oh man, I'm getting close to actually having a PR here. So then we forget all about what it was we needed to interleave back into the process. And then it becomes a race against the clock for this other thing. And the next thing you know, you've spent 400 or 500 rounds in your practice session in 3 hours. And you're like, oh, you get in the car and you're like, yes, I feel accomplished today. And then you get all the way home and you're like, crap, I really wanted to work on that other thing. And I wasted all of my resources just on this. So I try to interleave the complex stuff in with the more isolated stuff within the same realm of the one aspect or concept or principle of what it is I'm trying to get out of that particular practice session.
I like that a lot because I'm definitely guilty of that at times.
Oh, you and me both, brother.
Well, you know what I'm guilty of it more than anything else with? Your damn head box bill drill. I love you, brother, but I hate you for that drill.
Dude, I know it. I know.
I have done it.
That's the same thing. I spent a week and a case and a half of ammo just pushing a metric, right? And then, but the issue is like our friend AJ Zito. Like when I called AJ and was like, bro, I called him after day one. It was like, you'll never guess what I'm chasing. And when I explained to him what I was attempting to do, like after the first day, AJ was like, why? Like, are you a masochist? And I was like, well, no, I don't think it's ever been done. And he was like, okay, but Tim, answer me this. What is that truly doing for you as a shooter to truly like round your skill set off? Like, what are you learning from that? And at first I couldn't answer his damn question. It was just, I'm going to do this. And he was like, okay, you're a stupid guy.
There. Yeah. The mountain's there. Got to climb it. Yeah.
Exactly. So then the second day, another 400 or 500 rounds. And then the third day, another 300 or 400 rounds. And then finally on day 4, after I was basically ready to throw my hands up and say, I'm not doing this anymore. That's when, again, AJ, being the logical partner, was like, why don't you focus on your process? The same things that you preach to students all across the country on what to do. Why aren't you focusing on that? And he goes, and then what is your process? What are you gaining from this? What are you realizing? What are you learning along the way? And I was like, I think I've got things figured out. And he was like, no, you don't. And don't call me until you figure it out. And I was like, golly, but he was absolutely right. And when I really started focusing on just the process itself and letting the result be realized from my adherence to the process, it happened in like 13 reps or 12 reps on the 4th day. It was like, okay. And then it focused on how do I repeat that? How do I do that again? What did I truly pay attention to? And that's when I was able to realize what I truly learned in 4 days of chasing a metric wasn't that I could make the metric. It was, oh my God, so many like smaller nuances about the pressures I was like invoking on the gun and how I was working the trigger and just how much visually I needed to see and like what that process felt like, when I let go of excess tension. But if I let go of too much and didn't have the proper tension developed on the gun, then I also wasn't consistent. So it was like pure consistency for that. And that's what I truly learned on it. And it completely rewrote how I not only train my own grip and structure, but also how I teach that to students as well. So it wasn't all lost on 1,500 plus rounds and yay, I did it once. It's now become something, it's not really a staple, but it's become something that I can revisit now. And within 6 to 8 attempts, I can generally put one together in like 202 or 197 or, and I'm like, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm building the consistency with it.
So you said something there, man, that I think is really important, right? And I've been guilty of this. I think we've all been guilty of it. You just said you were guilty of it, right? You don't get the results by being result focused. You get the results by being process focused.
Yes.
And especially like under pressure on demand, right? And I think like that's where the wheels fall off for so many of us is, we get up to the stage in the match. We're like, I have to do it in this amount of time. We're gonna get this.
Oh my gosh, yes, right.
And that's not going to get you the result because you're gonna let your conscious mind screw things up. Like shooting is the most Zen thing there is.
Oh,
which
100%.
Is as much as I love Zen, my basic personality type is not. I'm not the person who finds it the easiest to be Zen. Let's put it that way. I think I love it because it's so hard for me.
Right. It's a lifelong pursuit, right?
Yeah. No, for sure. But that's like, I think the secret of on-demand performance for anything is you just have to, the work, all you're doing is exhibiting your current level of skill.
Yep.
All the work has to be done before that moment. You're
100%.
That Hollywood myth of the hero rising to the occasion without training because he's pure of heart is bullshit.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in the real world. Every gunfight I've ever been in, every mission I've ever done, every search warrant I've ever served, every investigation I've ever conducted, every physical fight I've ever been in as a cop, never once did I exhibit any higher level of skill than I had trained. It's not going to happen. It's just not.
Right.
And it should happen automatically and subconsciously. And that's like that concept, man. People talk about the, flow state. They talk about being in the zone. They talk about peak performance. Martial artists talk about Mushin, no mind. It's all different words, the same thing. You're just allowing it to happen. You're allowing your training to kick in and exhibit your current level of skill. And that's all we can do.
Yep.
Now we can grind awake and consciously influence the development of that skill. We have to.
Absolutely. That's why dry fire and live fire practice is so important.
Right. But then when it's time to exhibit it, you just got to let your conscious mind either deal with other issues, like in the tactical arena, like deal with the bigger problems in the environment, but it's not influencing the shooting. The shooting should run like a background program in a computer where the window isn't open showing the program, but it's still running.
Right.
I think.
No, I 100% agree with you. Like if I put conscious effort into a stage run, like at a match, I can't guarantee it at the time, right? Because we always think we know better than ourselves, it's going to work this time. Right. And it never does. But you can just I can guarantee at some point along the way, the train's going to fall off the rails. Whereas like my best and most consistent stage runs are when I've invested the time and resources in my own practice and then just trusted that is enough. Follow my process, grip the gun, manage the sights, and nothing else matters, right? Let my subconscious just run the program and trust it. And it's been phenomenal. Like some of the best matches I've ever had are the ones where you just like you unload and you show clear and you put the gun in the holster and you don't even know whether that was fast or not. Or you're not thinking about a conscious effort to speed. You're just like, that was a really good run. And then the RO calls out the time and you're like, holy shit, that was 3 seconds faster than anybody else like ran the stage. Like I've had that happen before. And you're like, did that really happen? Then you're asking RO like, hey, were you right behind me? Did that collect all the shots? You start second guessing yourself. It's like, no, that's the way it should be. And then I think that the pursuit beyond that is how do I have that happen all the time? Right.
Right.
It's like a drug addict chasing their first high. The first high is always the best. And it always goes downhill from there, and from shooting, it's the exact same thing. It's like you achieve it once and then you're like, how do I do that all the time?
Yeah,
There's
how
the
do I
lifelong
live?
pursuit.
How do I live in that place? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And I find, and this is funny, right? And maybe it's not like this for everybody. Maybe it's just my personality type. But you know what knocks me out of that mental state you want to be in the fastest? It's not having a bad run. It's having an excellent run.
Oh, yes.
Because in the next stage, I'm like, I'm that little. I can burn this down. And
yes.
behind me, the invisible Morgan Freeman is saying, but in fact, he did not actually burn it.
Yeah. Well, there becomes a little bit of that where you let the confidence kind of slightly turn into arrogance, just a touch, right? Like, well, if I did that good there, imagine if I was truly trying and
Yep.
I really burned it down. It's like, no, don't do that.
No. Do the same thing that works.
Right. That's like you've poured, 3 gallons of gas on the fire and you're holding the match going, oh, yeah. And it's like, no, don't throw it. Don't even light it. Like, just back off. Just trust that what you're already doing is enough.
Yeah. And that's such a hard thing to do.
It is.
But it's amazing. And like what I'm chasing now that I know guys like you can do, and I'm not there yet, is I want that ability to take that transmission in my head, right? And shift gears to precisely where I want to be on demand. And guys like you and like all the top guys, I know you guys can look at the scores and go, okay, I need to go just a touch more, just a touch less, but not enough where the wheels fall off.
And but you know what, Matt? I am not masterful at that at all. Like I am in the grand scheme of things of that one, like that task management, right? Or that aggression management. I'm like maybe B class when it comes to that, like I don't quite have it down. Like I'm learning and I'm really working on it. But those guys that can look at the scores, and be like, okay, I need to turn it up just a couple of percent. Like but knowing then where to push and then where they need to kind of just, I don't want to say lay back because they're never like laying off, right?
No, but where they're knowing it's going to be 100% consistent.
Right. And I started to, to really feel like little spurts of that throughout handgun nationals last month. Like when I was shooting single stack, it was kind of one of those like, okay, I am 45 points back going, like into day 3. I need to push just a little bit. But then like realizing like, okay, I can push on those far targets just a touch, but I need to pull it in just a little bit on these close targets so that I'm not giving away easy points. And so it's learning where that shift is just a little bit. And man, like I said, I'm not the guys like the Ben Steggers or the JJs or the Christian Seilers, the guys that really know. They're like, okay, I'm down 2.5%. I've got to put 3% up on the next guy on this next stage or today, or, I'm leading by 3.5%. So I don't want disaster to happen. I need to be, just a skosh conservative here. And it's like, when I turn on the conservative juice, it's like, I shut down, and I end up being like 15% off the pace. And I'm still trying to kind of realize or marginalize like where that balance is for me.
And like where I really see my weakness in that, apart from like some of the uneven performance in majors, is I've been shifting a lot between USPSA and IDPA this last year. And I plan on doing a lot more of that moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
The most difficult part has been going from one to the other and immediately finding the appropriate pace.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? That has been the most difficult part for me, is going to IDPA after shooting a USPSA local the last week and going, okay, now I've got to turn that rheostat, that volume knob to exactly here. And it doesn't help that I wasn't really born with a rheostat. I was born with a toggle switch.
You're full on or full off. That's it, right?
Pretty much. So, but I'm trying to, at my advanced age, trying to figure that out. I wish I could have done it when I was younger. Probably would have carried over to the rest of my life. Because that's the way I am about everything. I'm either like, whatever, dude, or I'm like,
right.
And it's been a lifelong struggle because I know that's not the best way to be. And I've gotten a lot better. And I think you've seen it in the last 5 years or so that we've known each other.
Absolutely. And the thing that I love about your aggressiveness, right, is you're not afraid of what 100% is, even if that means like, hey, we're crashing this car on the first corner if we have to. And I am not, I'm kind of the opposite. Like I've got a rheostat that kind of works me from like 2 to 8, but I have a hard time realizing that there's a 9 and a 10, on that rheostat that I need to seek out and push hard to that level too sometimes, because I think sometimes not pushing past my comfort zone, like I get a little comfortable with just like, oh yeah, man, that was really fast. And not understanding that, like, actually, I was only shooting at about my 92 to 93%. I don't really know where my 97 or 95% is, or even where my true 100% is. Like sometimes I see it and I'm like, yeah, that's it. And then I'll push a little bit more and I'm like, oh, wait, that wasn't. This is. And then I push a little harder and I'm like, okay, that was 120%. I need to back it way down. And instead of backing it down this much, I back it down this much. And that's not always good either.
Well, and whereas you ever seen Spinal Tap?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but these go to 11.
It goes to 11. But why don't you just make 10 higher? No, this goes to 11.
Yeah, right.
Well, this one goes to 11. And yeah, so like my challenge is the other way. My challenge is like trying to keep myself at 95 rather than either laying back at about 80% or turning it to 11.
Yes.
And that's like my personal struggle. And this is actually like a really good way to kind of bring in one of the other themes here is, and I alluded to this a minute ago, this would have had benefits for my life in general if I had started working on this at a younger age. I was always kind of proud of the fact that I just went to 11. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it served me well in a lot of ways, but it didn't serve me well in others. And I think that to truly know yourself and be like the person you are capable of being in every situation, you have to kind of have that rheostat for everything.
Oh, I agree completely. Whether we're talking about jobs or especially relationships, that's a tough balance. But I think the great thing is like when you start to train yourself, even in one realm of say martial arts or shooting or whatever kind of sport or hobby or something like that really piques your interest, like learning truly what and kind of evaluating like your mental capacities, where your limitations and where your struggles are, I think then does correlate to making you kind of just a better overall human being as well.
Oh, yeah.
Or a more aware human being.
So many things. And I was successful in my careers, but that success would have come easier if I had known when to turn the volume down.
Yep.
Being able to go to 11 got me a lot of places, but it also made it harder to get a lot of things accomplished with other people.
Absolutely.
And, it's just something that I think is a skill I think everybody needs to have, and it's hard to develop if you're not naturally kind of wired that way.
Self-aware.
Training like martial arts and shooting, and I think of shooting as a martial art anyway.
Oh, it absolutely is.
What we're doing is no different than kendo with bullets. I mean, it's a way of self-improvement, and if you do it right, you'll learn lessons about yourself that carry to everything else.
Correct.
And one of the biggest benefits for me has been developing that mental transmission. And that's helped me everywhere, not just in my shooting performance.
Yep. I do the same thing too, like even just with other chores or work around the house, or something like that. It doesn't hold my interest. You're like, oh God, I got to do this today. Like, well, I'll do it this much and I'll put in this much effort, and then there's a part of me that's like, I get down to that, to that minimal amount of effort. And you're like, would I do this if it were something I truly was passionate about, like shooting? No, I wouldn't just stop at this. Like I would do it correctly. I would want to pay attention to the right. I would want it done correctly. all right, I'm going to do this correctly, and it is, and then it turns into next, like, I don't know if it's sweeping the garage or whatever the
Right.
case may be. And then it turns in, and it turns into like the little things where little things then blossom into much greater things that you realize a lot of stuff about yourself based on your pursuits and your passions, and maybe, maybe realizing that kind of like following that pursuit in anything that you do.
No, absolutely. And I got two thoughts on that, man. Like, so one is that a lot of people think that people who are highly self-disciplined are disciplined that way because they enjoy being that way. That's really not the case. We play tricks on ourselves to make us do the things we know we need to do. And that's a habit that anybody can develop. And the best way to develop it is by picking up something you have to work hard at, like shooting or a martial, or like your former expensive hobby, race car driving, right? But like any of those things can teach you that discipline. And then if you make the conscious decision to apply that to everything else, it stands you in good stead. Right. And like a great example for me is my dual careers, right? Like when I first joined the Army, I had a hard time the first couple of years because I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I didn't want to do the stuff that I thought was nonsense, stupid. And then when I tried out for Special Forces, I realized that I wanted this end goal. So I was going to do whatever they gave me to do to get to that end goal. And it didn't matter if I liked it or not, if I thought it was stupid or not, it didn't matter. I was going to do it. And I'm glad I made that little switch because there was a lot of it that felt really stupid. But it got me to that end goal and it was worth it. And I think a really hard lesson, especially with our kids in our culture today, don't understand that. And that's because of a variety of reasons, right? It has to do with a lot of things. But if I could give one lesson to everybody like under the age of 30, it's that. It's who do you want to be and what do you want to do? Well, then you may have to do things you don't want to do to get there.
Yeah, it's not even you may have to do. You're going to have to do
You're
things.
Gonna have
yeah. You will have to do things you don't want to do.
And it's like that with shooting. Like when I first started USPSA, I did it as an adjunct to my jobs.
Mm-hmm.
There were things that felt kind of goofy to me, right? I was like, why am I doing an unloaded table start?
Right.
Why am I doing a turning draw to an unloaded table start? Like, I'm not ever going to have to do this. This is retarded.
Yep.
And then when I achieved, a limited level of success those first few months in the master, I was like, okay, maybe I can go somewhere with this. I got to do all the stuff I think is stupid. I got to do it.
I 100% agree. And there's other things.
I still think it's stupid. I actually don't anymore. Because the more varieties of ways you learn to manipulate your firearm, the more conversant and confident you are with handling your firearm.
Absolutely. I mean,
now I think it's valuable, but I'm just saying what I thought. You know what I mean?
Right. Because you're thinking like, well, I would never do that. Like my draw is this, and you become very singular minded.
Yes.
You start to understand that there's multiple realms of things that you haven't realized because you've never put yourself in that position to do those things before. And then you think about things like, well, my gun's in my holster. And when I take my gun off at night, in the holster, where do you put it? Well, I put it in the top drawer of my nightstand. So it's right there in case I need to get to it. Cool. Have you ever just practiced what it's like to roll over in your bed, pull open your nightstand, grab your gun and take it out of the holster and be ready to go with it?
And
well, no, I haven't. Well, why wouldn't you? Because that's just dumb. I wouldn't do that until you need to. And then you realize it's just like having a much broader skill or spectrum of skill within that one facet of shooting can make a world of difference just in your confidence level as a gun handler.
And one of the things I firmly believe is that, and I didn't always believe this when I was younger. And now I understand. There is training value in things often beyond their percentage of real world application, whether that real world is a match or a gunfight or whatever else, right? So I tell this to the cops I teach all the time, is that you don't just want to look at something and go, well, I wouldn't do that, so I'm not going to train it. does this make me better at doing the things I would have to do if something happens? And often the answer is yes, even though that particular practice is not directly relatable to an engagement in real life. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it still has carryover value. It's like, oh, here's a favorite of yours, one-handed shooting. Shooting strong hand, weak hand makes you better at shooting with both hands.
Absolutely, it does.
People don't realize that. So they don't put enough effort into it. They're like, well, we hardly ever do it. It doesn't really. They're like, no, that's not the right answer. Don't do just a little of it to make sure you can do it if you absolutely have to. Get really good at it because it makes you better at everything else.
Yep.
And I think people don't evaluate things in that way.
Well, I agree the same thing too. It's just like people that maybe are a little apprehensive to even start, like even just competing, like, oh, that stuff's not real. It's not, it's not realistic to real life. It's not this, it's not that. I don't want to build bad habits. We hear all the excuses in the world. I look at competitive shooting, and granted, it's very enjoyable for me. I love having my skills tested. I love pushing. I almost love having an end goal that goalpost is constantly being moved further and further away, right? Like I just enjoy the journey. But the thing I like about it most is that somebody else gets to test me in a way that I didn't think about, right? Yep. And so for like law enforcement to get involved in competitive shooting, and they're like you said, right? Like table starts. When you're seated in a chair and you're 8 feet away from the table, that makes no sense to me. And it's unloaded. Why would I do that? Well, somebody else thought of a test that you yourself didn't think of. So the great thing about that is that we don't become so singular focused in our own practice and training as well, right? How many people do you know? And I know you teach hundreds of students a year as well, just like I do, where the student comes to you and they're like, Matt, I wish I knew, like this class is great. I wish I knew how to put these things together in a dry fire and a live fire program, where you've just kind of been taken aback. Like, why wouldn't you think about doing those things? I just gave you the keys to the kingdom. Here it is. And they go, yeah, but if I just had a way of being able to organize these things into dry fire, or I wish I'd, and you think like, well, what about practicing table starts in dry fire? Oh man, I had never thought of that before. Well, why hadn't you thought of that before? And it's like, I'll be honest with you, I never thought about it. I'm sure you hadn't either, until somebody else tested us on it, right? Somebody designed a stage that said, I'm going to test this shooter's ability to do this. And so I use the tests that I have learned along the way, especially the tests that I have failed in practical shooting and competition, as basically the catalyst to navigate how I practice, right? The things that I do good are things that I want to touch on still, but the things that I didn't do so hot at in a match that somebody else decided to test me on, then those become ways to start navigating my live fire, my dry fire practice.
It's that feedback loop, right? That's why I consider
exactly
validation drills, basically. And like I tell guys on the SWAT teams I teach, they need to do this internally. Like do it where you're like, okay, Carl, next training session on the range, it's your turn to come up with a test for everybody and be evil, right?
Yeah.
And then it's a test that nobody else knows about. They get sprung on that day, and they treat it like a competition, because that's the only way to find out your weaknesses.
Right.
You've got to put the stuff in the pressure cooker and find out where it fails.
Yep.
That's why martial arts like BJJ and judo are so effective, and like Muay Thai is because you can go all out with the other person and put it in the pressure cooker.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, even though they may not necessarily have classical jiu-jitsu has definitely more evil techniques, right? More bone breaking, smashing, nasty techniques. But the problem is they never put it in the pressure cooker.
Right.
So techniques that are so-called, safe for competition actually wind up being more effective for those guys because they've tested.
Right. Well, and you compare it to like BJJ, right? There are certain times you'll go to the gym, and you're going to go to the gym and your professor is going to like, okay, today we're going to talk about an armbar, right? Or we're going to talk about this, and you'll learn the technique. And then for the next 3 or 4 nights, you might go to open mat night, and it is just straight up, I am going to work this with this guy, my training partner, and we're going to roll a multitude of ways for an hour or 2 hours, just trying to figure out where the weaknesses of this particular technique are. You're isolating that.
And how to get to it.
Right. How to get to it, how to break out of it, where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are. The same way we need to be really hyper focused on our shooting if we're working on isolation exercises that same way. It's like we learn the technique and then we need to exploit every strength and even more so every weakness of that technique. Like for shooting, for instance, how many people do you know that their dry fire, and I know you know the same way, but most dry fire is, even if it's coming from appendix, it's like their hands basically just like touching the bottom of their hem of their shirt, so they can lift the shirt and get the gun out, and they're just focusing on beating a part-time there. And they might raise their hands to like an interview or like a surrender type of, but have you ever seen anybody really draw to a compromised position, like draw to a kneeling position, or draw to around a left side or a right side of a barricade, or draw to a squatted position?
One of my favorites, draw while you're doing a break fall.
Yeah.
I mean, you can fall, you can slip, you get knocked on your ass. I have fallen on my ass in combat more times than I care to admit. It just happens, right? Yep. Bust your ass. Can you get your gun into play while you're busting your ass?
Yep. And I think sometimes that people, I'm just going to do the thing, my draw. I see whatever whiz bang cool thing on Facebook or Instagram, or, whatever drill of the week that's being shared around by all of the Instagram famous guys. And people are like, well, that's what I need to do because that's what somebody told me. That's what I saw. And they don't think to really pressure test that particular skill or technique against a multitude of different criteria that might see where that technique breaks down. Like, just draw around the corner of your doorway, with like a slight lean to the left or right, and tell me how consistent that the dot or those sights present to the target. We're talking 10 to 15 degrees of movement. And they're like, oh, I don't know what's going on. I do, because you don't test it before. You've not found out the weakness of that particular skill set.
I think too that you have to do the most basic form of the technique first and become competent at that. But once you do that, I think you need to inject these variables in constantly. You're not changing the technique, you're changing the condition you are in to implement the technique from.
Correct.
And I think competition is great for that, because think about all the different ways you have to draw. Like all the different movements you're making. You're coming from the sitting position, you're coming from laying in a cot. We had one at the last IDPA major I did where you were laying in a cot inside a tent.
Yeah.
And you had to get up and do a table start. But you're testing your gun handling and your shooting and injecting all of these distractions in and seeing how they affect the technique.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to do that because that's how you pressure test your technique.
Absolutely. You got to find out where its strengths are, and then again where the weaknesses are on that, or where your weaknesses are in application to that technique, so that you can fix those things. Like I get students all the time that come to class. They're like, man, I've got, I've been shooting a red dot, or I've been shooting a, whatever for X amount of time, and I've really got it sorted out now. And then the moment you put them in some sort of a stage or some sort of a test where now they've got to draw off to the left, or draw, 2 steps off to the right, or something like that, or they have to draw even into a port. And the next thing you know, they're hunting around and moving their hands around to try to find the dot. It's like, well, I thought you said you had this stuff straightened out. Well, yeah, but that's a weird position there. Well, wait a minute. You've not tested that particular technique or that skill set to other positions to find out like what you need to do to improve that. They're like, oh, I hadn't really thought of that before. I'm like, ta-da! Now you do. Now you've got a reason to start testing other things. You got to think outside the box. The hard part is it's hard for us to sometimes think outside the box. That's the great part about competitions, because somebody else is always thinking outside of a completely different box to give us material.
Yep,
yeah.
To challenge us. Yeah. And I see this a lot in my classes, because the bulk of my students are either, defensive-minded civilians or law enforcement or that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them can burn it down on like the close in standards. You know what I mean? That
Right.
involve on a bunch of shots in one target. They can burn it down. But then when I put them on a more complex series of tasks involving movement and strange positions, it falls apart. I mean, I'm talking guys that have like there's some guys that have some pretty impressive build drills from concealment or from duty rigs that come into my classes.
Yeah.
Some of those guys, that's kind of where that's their own personal little prison they've created for their skill.
Correct.
You know, and they've got to break out of that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with what they developed. It's a great starting point. You know, it's absolutely a great starting point. But then you've got to start challenging yourself in other ways.
Yep.
You know, it's not just about anybody's particular set of like standards either. Like that's the other thing I see. You know, you shouldn't be basing all of your training on my patch. I mean, I think it's a great drill,
Mm-hmm.
but that shouldn't be all you're working on. You know, that holds true for everybody. You know, everybody that's got their like, you know, personal little set of standards. Those are great, but you need to challenge yourself in more and more complex and unusual ways as your skill develops.
I think part of that is kind of like what we've become, you know, where, I mean, well, it's not what we've become, it's what we've always been for the most part, right? The majority of people, especially when it comes to a martial skill set, such as shooting or competition or defensive minded stuff, right? There's like putting a metric on something is very easy to then just approach or to pursue that particular metric. And at the end of that metric is basically in parentheses next to it is like, that's my good enough standard, right? I don't want to be better than that because I don't want to have to push the skill set or the time and investment and resources into becoming better than that. So if I just achieve this one metric, I'm good enough. And from the dawn of time, human beings have been predisposed to being just, I want to be good enough at something, right? There's outliers like us and many others that there's never such a thing as good enough. It's like, what's next? Where can I push the envelope again? You know, where do I push this skill from here?
Well, I think the problem there is, I mean, look at nature, right? There's no such thing as stasis in nature at all. You're either growing or you're dying. You're either improving or you're degrading.
Yep.
There is no arrival. You never get to a place and you go, okay, I got it now. I can just stop. There was an action movie. Oh, what was its name? Faster with Dwayne Johnson. And the villain was like this megalomaniacal multimillionaire who decided to become an assassin for the kicks. And the opening scene is him doing like this elaborate, exotic, like yoga sequence, right? And he gets off and he calls his girlfriend and goes, I did it. I beat yoga. I'm like, I don't think you understand how this works. Which was kind of the joke of the scene, right? It was giving you a clue into the character's personality. It's like,
right.
That's not how that works. You don't pick up something and beat it and then just abandon it. You leave one skill for another if you decide to change your route, and that's okay. But you don't go, I beat race car driving.
No, yeah. God, no. Right. I mean, and that's the thing too. Like you see guys like, let's say Rob Latham, for instance, or, you know, who's won, what is it, like 38 national championships or something like that. He's won 6 or 7 world titles. Like my question always to Robbie was, what's kept you coming back? You know, like you've won everything there is to win. Isn't that enough? And he's like, no, because winning is fun and you're always looking to push the envelope to something else. Like Christian Seiler, somebody just had interviewed Christian a couple of weeks ago, just after he won Open. You know, and Christian was like, my push for next year is I want to push to be 5% better than the rest of the competition from this past year. Like, what define what 5% better even looks like? But it's like, really, it's an indefinite number. At that point, it's just like the metric is, I want to be better than I was today. I want to push 5% more than that. What does that mean? Well, that just means I'm going to keep working, keep pushing, and see if I can't realize what that goal is. Maybe next year he wins by 9% instead of winning by 4%, and okay, there's he's gotten his 5% better. And then what? Like, where do you continue to push? Where other people say they might, like, the goal might be, I want to win nationals one time, or I want to make grandmaster, or I want to make B class. And it's like, once it's achieved, they don't really know where to go next, and it just becomes like, okay, there was the metric I wanted to achieve. I'm good enough now. I'm ready to move on to something else or focus my efforts elsewhere.
Martial arts all the time. Like people's goal is becoming a black belt, right?
Yep.
And in most, not in BJJ really, but in most martial arts, black belt is about like B class USPSA. It really is. It's not. I mean, BJJ is a bit different. I would say it's more like M or GM and BJJ because the ranks take a lot longer to get. But you see,
I would say the challenge with that, right, is, and we hear it a lot from guys that are like truly lifelong, passionate pursuers of like the sport of like BJJ, right? They get their brown belt or they finally get their black belt, and then it's like now all the pressure's off to try to push for the goal, and they realize like the true work and focus actually now has begun.
Yep,
and I know that's the way it was for me when I first achieved Grandmaster. It was like, okay, now the pressure is off as far as like chasing some arbitrary goal had then turned into, okay, now the pressure's off there. I can just let myself learn. And so I've made more progression in the last 3 or 4 years as a shooter, or 5 years as a shooter, as a Grandmaster than I ever did in the years leading up to trying to push to get over that hump.
Because the progression becomes different. It's no longer I have to get these hit factors and these classifiers, or I have to pass this Shodan test, right?
Right.
I have to do this kata. I have to fight these people. I have to do this.
Yeah, but it's more visceral. It's just like I've got to.
How do I get better?
Right.
And what does better look like for me? Where am I going?
Right.
What do I need to work on? What are my weaknesses? What are the gaps in my game? How can I get my mental game better? How can I learn not to dial it up to 11 when I get frustrated?
Right.
Right. And if it's done right, this is why I think of shooting as a martial art, even competition shooting, because I know people will argue with that because it's not tactical, right? The hard skill of shooting is the hard skill of shooting. It doesn't change if you're doing USPSA or CQB. The context in which you employ that skill changes, but the skill itself is not different. And more skill is never a limiting factor, right? Being better is never going to hurt you. So, and that's how I kind of disregard the critics there. But the reason why I would categorize even like USPSA and IDK as martial arts is, number one, they do have a martial background, right? I mean, they were invented by Jeff Cooper. I mean, the man had seen some stuff,
Right.
It is capable of being a lifelong pursuit that can better you as an individual. Not everybody does it, but not everybody does it in other martial arts either. There are plenty of assholes in every pursuit. But if you do it right with the right mindset and you're really thinking about this as like a journey of self-improvement, competition shooting can definitely do that for you. It's certainly done it for me. Yeah. And I think there's not enough recognition of that in our communities. I think that needs to be recognized more. And I think that a lot of kind of some of the toxic behaviors we see would fade away a bit if more open acknowledgement of the fact that it's like a journey of pursuit of self-improvement. If more of that was put out there, I think it would help with that. And I really think it has the capability of being as good for that as any other martial art.
Absolutely.
Making you a better person. Absolutely. Making you more competent at just being a good human being. And I don't mean that just in an ethical sense, but in the sense of being good at the skills you need mentally to be good at life, right?
Right.
Like not turning up to 11, like we joked about earlier, right? Not turning up to 11 unless it's necessary.
Right. Well, not even just like turning it up to 11, but knowing what true rising potential looks like, or knowing what it's like to overcome adversity. The road got a little bumpy, So forget it. I'm not doing it anymore. It's gotten hard. And knowing that, like, no, I've overcome this kind of stuff before. I'm going to push beyond that, or sometimes even knowing your limitations of like, it's not worth pushing beyond that. Like it's not worth that pursuit. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, we have gone about an hour. So is there anything else you'd like to tell the listeners and viewers before we wrap it up?
Oh gosh. Yeah. If you'd like to train with me, look me up on my website, which is timherronshooting.com. I'm pretty easy to reach out to. If you send me an email, tim@timherronshooting.com, or I don't know, the Facebook or the Instagram or YouTube. I try to be, one of the most accessible guys, kind of in our little, village industry, so to speak. But yeah, I love traveling. I love teaching. I love talking about training. Clearly, we burned up an hour here back in no time. But yeah, I mean, if you've got questions, I'd love to be able to pursue an answer with you, or seek me out for a training or a class or things like that. But yeah, that's about all I've got.
And I know I said it before, but for everybody out there, it's worth reiterating. One of the best classes I've ever taken. So if you get a chance to train with Tim, definitely take advantage of it.
I appreciate that.
Hope everybody enjoyed the episode. I'm hoping I can have you on again soon. We definitely did not exhaust this conversation.
No, I would love to come back. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you all later.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Way is in Training. Please come back again as we explore how training makes us better at our craft and better in our everyday lives. See all of you soon.